In the Bible, we start off in the Old Testament with a story called the story of creation in Genesis 1. And if you were to take this literally, and you were a thinking person, you would probably look for the nearest exit and exit the whole building where that book was contained and get as far away from it as you could. Because it makes no sense whatsoever. For example, it says that on the first day, let there be light. But actually, it's not until the fourth day that we get a sun and a moon. So what is the light? And where does it come from? Then there is this thing about there are waters above on the second day and the third day, waters above and waters below the firmament, meaning the sky, the heavens. Well, what's the water above the sky? I mean, we've got Hubble telescope out there looking, and we haven't seen any big lakes out there. And what is the water below the sky? Well, it must mean the oceans and the seas. And then God creates all kinds of creatures, including man and woman are created, and they propagate the earth. Then on the seventh day, God, totally exhausted from all of this, rests, called the Sabbath. And then sometime later, who knows how much later, there is the first man who is looking for a clothing store in the Garden of Eden shopping mall. And he has a wife named Eve. And to make the whole thing more interesting, there's a walking snake who talks. And the walking snake says to Eve, though God has told you not to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge, actually, if you want to become like God, like a God, you have to eat from that tree. And you know the rest of the story. They're thrown out of the shopping mall, given them some Gap jeans, and mankind has suffered ever since, according to many people, because of Eve's disobedience and Adam being a wuss. You see, my friends, it's very hard to become interested in religion with such stories. So let us see if we can't bring a little bit more understanding to who Adam was. Adam, according to Baha'i teachings, is the first messenger of a universal cycle, of many universal cycles that have existed before, of which we have very little or no knowledge because of great changes in the earth. You know, most of the archaeology, and particularly the early history of mankind, has been surmised with very few artifacts. Let me give you an example. The way some of these sciences work, it would be as if you were walking on a beach and you found a bolt in the sand, and you picked the bolt up and you took it home and you researched it and you examined it and you hypothesized it, and out of finding the bolt, you created a Chevrolet Corvette. A great deal of speculation is involved. We really don't know. We have clues, But most of what we know about early times really comes from religious text. We're going to find some very interesting things as we move into history, but not until really the post-Christian era are we finding that history is an accurate record of what happened. Prior to that is many confusion. We really don't know much about Jesus. We don't know exactly when he was born, what really happened to all his disciples. We don't know when Krishna was born. We don't know when Buddha was born. For sure we don't know when Adam was born. But there are many traditions about first man. Can you all see that? Or should I? My wife says I have to use black. See, I'm using black. See? Some people call this a conspiracy. Perfect man. Referred to. Adam exists in every tradition. In Hinduism, he's called Adim. In the Persian traditions, he's called Geomart. He's referred to as Adam in the Judeo-Christian Islamic traditions. But there was some being that came to teach the faith of God. Maybe 4,000 BC, maybe as early as 10,000 BC. We don't know. But this first man, according to these traditions, and even the Jewish traditions talk about a great teacher who taught the arts, music, and was the inventor of writing, the inventor of irrigation, brought many technologies, discoverer of scientific and philosophical understandings. Not the guy who didn't know any better but eat the apple from the forbidden tree. He was extremely handsome and of tall stature, taller than the average, with a physical being that was like a god. In fact, he was thought to be a god. The people's understanding of God was not of some unknowable, unseeable reality, but had to be seen and felt and touched and experienced. So Adam was seen as a god in many of these traditions. He might have began his mission in south of India, moving up through India into what we now call Iran, over to Afghanistan, over to Samaria, Babylonia, which we now call Iraq, moving into the Holy Land, Israel, what we now call Israel, down into Africa. We don't know, but we do know that all the ancient traditions talk about the first man. And what he came to bring were not only the knowledges that would allow a new civilization in all these areas to be created, which we'll show in another slide. We'll see civilizations sprouting up on the so-called crescent that all of these great religions appear. We will see these civilizations that have great similarities, and their theologies and doctrines have enormous correlations between one another. And in fact, in order to explain that, historians have come up with a theory of Aryan migrations to help explain why are all these civilizations so similar, from Egyptian over to the ancient Indian Indus Valley people. But the perfect man is, as we talked about earlier, we had a conversation, perfection means perfect mirror. Hey, my friends, I'm in optics. A perfect mirror does not distort or change the color of what you see in the mirror. If I point the mirror to you, I see a perfect image in the mirror of you. Since humans cannot see God directly, does not have access to that realm, by looking in a perfect mirror, they see an image. That image is that tiny, tiny drop, that infinitesimal small amount of the reality of things that humans are capable of seeing, which in itself is infinite. So Adam came to teach about God, the one unknowable essence, but most of the people could only see Adam. They couldn't see beyond the human Adam. So he was called God. But some did. Some began a very childlike understanding. He's the first man of a universal cycle, man not referring to male and not referring to the man on our evolutionary chart at the top of nature. But first, reality called man that demonstrates to the rest of us what our potential is. The first demonstration of potential. First man. See, you can see now why so many people are running around saying Adam is the first Homo sapien. Why? They took the meanings literally. So the second lesson that Adam came was to teach the very first principles of morality. Hey, do you know, we'll show at the summary, and I do recommend that you come for the summary of the class. We'll show some interesting slides. In fact, you have it there. If you go back to your last lesson, you will see a slide that shows the evolution, where you see the different images of God that we have as we evolve. Before Adam, God was seen as a female with two large fonts symbolizing the nurturing aspect of God's religion. The fonts of milk will be metaphors for spiritual knowledge and laws that protect mankind, the nurturing. The human relationship to God was that of an infant to the mother. So now Adam comes where we must move on from that total dependency to where the child begins to make decisions. Remember, the human has been given a rational soul, which means that there is the ability to compare something with something else. Compare a situation that you find yourself in with some standard. That will be called a balance. That balance of justice. Justice is integral with the rational soul. You are weighing something that is unknown with something that is known. You are taking a scientific principle in science and you are applying it to a new condition. The scientific principle, law of gravity, being universal and eternal. The unknown is a particular problem in civil engineering. A daily practical problem. So you're using a universal principle to solve a practical problem. My friends, I've just defined morality to you. Okay? Now, the tree of knowledge that Eve took the apple from is that tree of universal truths. The tree of knowledge actually is the Word of God. Tree of life. Why life? Christ said, I've come to raise the dead. He wasn't competing with the union of morticians. He was talking about bringing that spiritual knowledge so that humans could rise to their true nature, which is life itself, which is immortal. Because our true reality is immortal. The body dies, but the human reality continues to live. So true life, what messengers are interested in is long-term mortgages. They're not interested in short-term loans. Christ did not come here because he wanted to cure all the lepers from their skin diseases. He came so that the leper of perversity could be cleansed from their vain imaginings and become enlightened to a new reality, to a state of purity that would allow that immortality, that nobility to come out. Nobility, what does that mean? That means the potential of things. The nobility of copper is gold. The nobility of human beings is to demonstrate perfections. Elena Marcella, who wrote a book called The Quest for Eden. I recommend any of you get your hands on it. But she says that Adam, by laying down the first moral law for mankind, also made man capable of sin. So what sin means is very simple. Sin is when you know something and you do something that doesn't agree with what you know. It's very simple. It is a part of evolution. It's a part of human growth. Sin is necessary. It is a part of every growth process. What Darwin was really looking at on those islands when he was observing the birds, he was observing the birds go through an unconscious sin. They were experimenting. Nature was experimenting. Humans experimenting consciously, you have to become accountable for your experiments. The child tests the mother, sees what happens when they do something that they know is not what they're supposed to do. Human beings are like that. And so this whole process is what Adam introduces, is not the process as much as consciousness of it. A consciousness of that understanding of divine knowledge and action being connected to a conscious decision-making process. So Adam introduces to mankind morality, the whole story of the Garden of Eden. One understanding of it is exactly that. Now, all of this understanding will progress by degrees from each messenger to the next. We're going to watch how morality progresses from the simple things of defying God with very obvious consequences to more and more complexity and subtlety. Because as human capacity increases, their capacity for deviousness also increases. Their capacity to play with their morality increases. Let me say one other thing here. According to the Quran, Adam brought Islam, which means submission. And when Abraham comes, he also brings Islam, a higher level of submission. And when Moses comes, he brings Islam again, which is a higher understanding of submission. So when these messengers bring things, they bring them to evolve through history. Religion, my friends, is historical. But it is not driven by simple material things in history. It's driven by divine energies, by divine plans. But it is historical. We will see submission being very childlike at the time of Adam, becoming highly evolved by the time we get to the Baha'i teachings. He also brought a book, according to the Quran. Adam brought a book. Now, whether the book is actually written, that could be because he was called the inventor of writing. But most of the people did not read. In fact, most of the people do not read until fairly recently. So, books were read by a very small group of people. Most people knew the holy text through memorization. According to Islam, Adam and his son Seth. Now, who's Seth? You all know who Seth is. See, Adam had Cain. He had Abel. Cain kills Abel. Cain is then told to leave. Okay? And then we find there's a whole religious line that comes from Cain. It wasn't that bad. And then there's a third son, Seth. And Seth becomes a follower of Adam, becomes a disciple of Adam, and he and Seth build the first Kaaba, according to Islam. Abraham and Ishmael will rebuild the Kaaba many thousands of years later. And of course, what happens when Muhammad comes into Mecca? He again rebuilds the Kaaba. So the Kaaba is a recurring theme. It is a symbol of the resurrection of religion. Now, we have Noah. Now, Noah is a very interesting prophet because he really doesn't know a lot about shipbuilding, but he has to build an ark in which a pair of everything has to go on it. Can you imagine that? He's got a microscope, make sure all the viruses are represented, the microbes, right? He's got special compartments for, we think there could have been some mammoths, still maybe not too many, at least large elephants and giraffes. This was a heck of a ship. But his people rejected him for the most part. He had only a few followers. Later Muhammad would be asked, did he have 40 followers or 72 followers? And Muhammad said yes. Most of the people rejected Noah. He then brings his few family and a few of his followers on board the ark, as well as the animals, and they survived the great flood, which is not recorded in any history book. There is absolutely no indication that there was some worldwide flood. There were some small floods, but there was no worldwide flood. We don't know of any historically. And Noah's right about that time where we should have certain indications of a worldwide flood recorded. Now, there could have been a flood, but what is the spiritual significance is we'll find that flood and seas and water refer to the condition of mankind. We'll see it again with Moses and the parting of the Red Sea. That the ark refers to the teachings of Noah, to the covenant of Noah. And the people were protected from the sea of iniquity, from drowning in the sea of self. Did God punish people? Yes, that could be very possible because of the low level of maturity of mankind at that time. They needed more physical type of consequences. But remember, we are talking about even with children, we know today now that to raise children properly, you treat them as noble beings. And you begin to introduce to them as soon as possible their own volition and own consequences, and begin to teach them cause and effect on both the physical plane as well as the spiritual plane. Cause and effect in the spiritual plane, there's a word for that. It's called karma. It's also used by the Indians for the physical plane, by the way, which is I find very interesting. They don't make as many distinctions between the spirit and the physical. So the flood, you see, every messenger of God brings his followers on the ark of salvation and protects them from the sea of their selfish desires. Everyone. Now, the Quran then mentions a couple of other prophets that aren't mentioned in the Bible. One is named Hud, H-U-D, and the other Soleh. One came to a city called Ad. Hud came to Ad, and Soleh came to a city called Talmud on the Arabian Peninsula. Now, some people believe they are descendants of the that they are part of those early Arabian people. But whatever, Elena Marcellus thinks that they are the original Sumers. They are the prophets that teach the Sumer people. But in both cases, according to the Quran, the people rejected these prophets, and these cities were destroyed, one by fire and the other by earthquakes. But what's so fascinating is that when you read that in the Quran, then the very next verse say, the next morning the peoples lay prostrate on the floor, meaning an act of total submission. You know, prostration is the symbol in Islam of submission to the will of God. There's 5 rakats. One is standing, one is raising the arms, the other is putting the hands on the knees, the other is sitting, and the one is prostrating on the ground. We have the same in the long obligatory prayer. See? The rakats are just put in that form. So that there could be a meaning that, yes, destroyed, meaning there were consequences to their behavior, but it also could mean that people realized the error of their way, that they saw the truth of what these prophets had brought. But it was too late.